Hello everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we are back with Cardano, and since our last video not too much has changed on the US dollar charts. We're mainly going to be interested in the Bitcoin Cardano chart. That's where I think an interesting thing has taken place. But that doesn't mean we're going to ignore the US dollar either. So without wasting any more of your time, let's get straight into it. Looking at where we currently are here, we can see that a few things have played out fairly similarly to last cycle. We can see that first of all, we have our bear market times where we have strong downward trends for Cardano. This is where its price action started, so this is where we're going to start comparing from. We can see these are defined by these purple trend lines that we saw this cycle as well. We then set in a low sometime a year afterwards, roughly about a year. We set in our first low, and we then spend about another year operating within this range to eventually return to that same low that we first set in. And we saw this cycle as well. Now we spent a much longer period of time trending down and a much shorter period of time oscillating within this range, but in total it basically added up to the same amount of time, with last cycle taking place over 114 weeks, so over 2 years, and this cycle taking 111 weeks. So again, over 2 years, very similar time frames. And as we can see, as we get closer to the halving, Cardano picks up in price, and we usually start to trend slowly up, or at least we did last cycle, and this is what we're currently seeing this cycle. And this is what I'm going to focus on mainly in this video when we're talking about the US dollar charts. The first thing, of course, is the halving to be aware of. This is this orange line. We can see that we obviously have been trending up much sooner, much earlier in terms of around the halving dates. And we can see we've also been kind of spending a similar amount of time doing so. This sort of 35-week period was recorded from the first kind of strong move down that Cardano had. And we can see that when we take a look at it here, this is where we had our first sort of a pullback. So we get a pullback and then a bit of a recovery into our rally. Now last cycle we had COVID, so this, those 3 red weeks were completely unexpected, and we can see nothing like that has played out this time, or at least so far. Now as a consequence, whether that's just a different bear market, we've also had a lot less trading volume over this time. So we can see our first cycle we had about $33 billion of trading volume over the 35 weeks, so roughly $1 billion of trading volume a week. Here we're just about getting $2.5 billion of trading volume, which is again a lot, but considering Cardano is in the top 10 altcoins, it's a bit disappointing, and to be honest with you, a bit worrying, because again, during this time in the crypto space, there was a lot of energy. Cardano was bubbling along with the crypto space. There was a lot of talk and excitement in the whole crypto space in general. And while that's similar here, the excitement that is being hyped up is a different type of excitement. And that's because there are these big institutions investing instead of kind of all these retail individuals hoping to take control of their money, that kind of a narrative. Anyway, we're not going to get too into that today. The first thing we're looking at is this blue line that we've seen play out with Cardano last time. And this, funnily enough, kind of started after the halving, so now we're seeing it take place before. Again, talking about this earlier cycle start, sort of a translation to the left, a mathematical translation to the left. Now we can see that both of these times, I haven't drawn this line long enough, but if I do, I will lose a bit of my accuracy with the horizontal, but that seems fine. We can see that we kind of put in a high before having a pullback. So we can see, again, it's over a longer period of time, but we put in a high. We have a pullback, so we have our pullback here. And we do go back down to this white line, this sort of low that Cardano sets after the bear run, where we finally see a reversal. We return down to these lows like we did. We have a strong rally up into the halving. Now again, this is much earlier, but we still get this strong rally up where we break past this blue line again. And here we can see we get a bit of a cool off in between these two sort of peaks. We had a middle ground where we had a bit of a slowdown and then a stronger move to the upside. This could be that sort of middle ground now. You could expect maybe a strong move to the upside, and if we get a similar level from before, if we take it from close to the lows to where we would close, we would get another 100% move, which probably isn't too unreasonable, and it would bring us to about $1. So I think that's very possible, but again, that's just one scenario. You could very easily change these lines to sort of match them up with the peaks this way, and that would paint a very different picture. It kind of paints a more explosive one in a way, where once Cardano comes back down to this level, we are most likely going to explode upwards with this ascending wedge, or at least that's what it looks like. Anything can happen, but most likely we would move to the upside with this unless something terrible happened in the crypto space. So you can look at it either way. Again, you might prefer it this way because we're still comparing from sort of this height to this height, this move here to this move, and then this guy doesn't really line up. So it's kind of how you want to take it. But you could also argue that technically we don't come to the closes here, even though it's pretty accurate, to be honest with you. It's a pretty nice ascending wedge pattern. So definitely something to be on the lookout for. Another thing to point out is that we haven't kind of tested the bull market support band properly yet. We've been staying well above, but the last time we did test was when we had a bit of a pull down. Now, if we're kind of looking at this kind of a scenario, pull down isn't unreasonable, and that could bring us back to the bull market support band. However, it looks too much of like an explosive pinch for us to spend too much time going sideways. So most likely we won't see something like this play out where we spend a few weeks oscillating around. It also kind of lines up with the halving, and historically, like we all know, the halving has led to good price action basically immediately afterwards. And with how long the crypto space has been around, especially Bitcoin, and always seeing that 99% of altcoins rally during the halving with Bitcoin, there's no real reason to assume it would be any different this time. But again, there can always be exceptions. This would probably mark our second blue line here. So if we clone this guy and bring him over, we could expect something like this potentially. This could be marking our top. Again, it's kind of where you want to go. If we get an explosive move up like this, it could definitely be around the $1 kind of a mark. It all depends really on what's going to happen. If you're thinking we'll have similar percentage moves, then you're more in line with us coming to this dollar price, which, to be honest with you, I think is probably more accurate, especially with catalysts like the halving coming up. But if you're more conservative, you might want to pull this down a little bit more close to these highs and say that we're now due this pullback that we saw last time. But again, every cycle is different, and when you zoom out, they can look very similar. The nitty-gritty details week by week can be extremely different, even though, like, again, broadly, we have our downward bear market time, then we have our consolidation, we set in our low and return to it, we set in our low and return to it, whether that's once or multiple times, and then we kind of start our rally and move into our bull run. And that's kind of the phase where we are now. We do notice though, after the halving, there is a pullback. Whether that does happen or not, I don't know, but be aware that that basically is the final pullback until we get to the sort of all-time high territory. So kind of, if you're wondering whether to buy crypto now or wait for a dip, historically, once the halving has happened, the price has not ever returned to those lows. So if you're in the camp of believing that things will play out how they have done last time, your best time to buy, theoretically, based on historical values, is kind of now. Just something to keep in mind. Now, looking at the Bitcoin pair, the main thing I want to talk about is kind of this trend line, really. It's kind of a median price, really, of where Cardano has operated on its Bitcoin pair leading up to the halving. And we can see while the US dollar charts have played out differently, and we've seen sort of an earlier price movements take place. So we started rallying much earlier on the US dollar charts. Here, we've actually basically played out the same. We had our move down, and then we've basically spent the same amount of time doing the same things leading up to the halving. And we can see right now we're a couple of weeks before the halving. We're about a month, give or take. And if we kind of went a month, 3 weeks back from the halving, we were below like this kind of line. And where does this line come from, you can ask? Well, it basically comes from the first time we have a significant bounce off this low, which is where we kind of came from here. We kind of touched and then had a significant move up. That's where I set this price. Now, you could pull it from multiple other places. It's counted as this support technically as well. But it's kind of solidified itself here the most as this resistance. And as we can see, we have a move up, get rejected, and move back down. So we have a move up, get rejected, and move back down to our white. We then have another bounce and push above. We have another bounce and push above. And note that we are always testing this trend line. So for example, here when we moved from our white, we spent weeks being rejected from it to eventually explode up above it. And then once we kind of put in our high here, like we put in our high, we come back down, and then we spend, close to 3 weeks at this price basically. So we close the week here at this price. We spend the whole week basically on this price. And last cycle, this was 500 Satoshis. and we even open the third week at this price, and now we do break down. But again, we come back down to this low, we rally above, and we come right back down to this level. So it's very, very important. And you can even see, like, after the halving, we even come back down to it once again. And this is months. This is basically 6 months after the halving. So just before the bull run takes place, or took place last cycle. Now let's just finish our comparison here. We can see we have our move to the upside. We come back down, and the key difference here is that we take much longer to come back down. But again, the whole time we're testing this as a support, as a support, as a support. And the most interesting thing again is now we've seen the bull market support bands invert. And this is going to kind of propose two scenarios, because we didn't see that happen this time. The bull market support bands did not invert. You can see once we kind of finally broke down below this line from our red, we quickly came back up, we bounced off this low, and we didn't invert basically. But here we spent so much time that we've inverted, and now we could very well come back down to these lows like we did last time. It's not impossible. I would actually kind of be in the camp that we might not, but also with the halving coming up, Bitcoin usually leads, and for Cardano to lose a bit of price against Bitcoin over the next few weeks is definitely not impossible. Definitely not impossible. So maybe we don't return to these lows again, or at least not before the halving, and maybe we come back up above this line quickly and we have another inversion. That's also a very likely story. However, you might want to compare it to here, where we had this inversion, and this was followed by a few weeks, multiple weeks, of very poor price action on the Bitcoin charts. And this is what we've had realistically for the last 2 months. Very poor price action, not as drastic, but it's still been majority red weeks. And that's when we last saw our last inversion. And what happened when we inverted? We went even further down, basically. It was kind of a scare in the markets. Now, this happened after the halving, when a lot of the hype kind of lulls. You know, we get a peak during the halving of hype, and then halving's done, so there's not too much to look forward to. But then you get a lot of retail investors coming back in, and that's what brings us through this sort of wave of hype, if you get me. This could be a similar thing where now BlackRock has had its ETF approved. It's probably slowing down with how much it's buying. There doesn't really seem to be many new retail investors coming in, so maybe we're getting a bit of a slowdown. And maybe the halving will be the second wave that brings a bit of revival to the crypto space. It might not be a real big deal, to be honest with you, the halving. It's very difficult to say, especially as how different the markets are now compared to where they were here. But to basically summarize, you kind of have two options. You kind of think we're here, and we will probably very quickly come back up above this line, and when the halving takes place, we'll do very well. Or you think because of this bull market support and inversion, that we're here, and because we've had multiple bad weeks leading up to this, like we have here, there's a very good chance that we break to the downside, like we did last time. But also just be aware that when we did break down to this low, and we did return to this 500 sats level again, we did ultimately then explode upwards and put in all-time highs for Cardano on the Bitcoin pair. So either way, long term, Cardano does well, if it wants to play out how it did historically last cycle. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. That's totally fine too. Comment down below what you think, whether you're in the inversion camp or if you're in this sort of trendline camp. I'd be very interested to know what the stats are on that, because oftentimes the herd mentality dictates what happens. So if you guys are letting each other know what happens, you might potentially be able to help each other make more money. But that's neither here nor there. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Take care and peace.